As the evening light softens over Alexandria, you arrive by the harbour road. The stones beneath your sandals still hold a little of the day's warmth, though the sea breeze has begun to smooth the heat away. Salt comes first on the air, then bread, then tar from ship timbers, and somewhere nearby the faint sweetness of crushed dates. Before you, the harbour darkens from copper to blue. Masts stand in rows against the fading sky. Ropes pull softly against wood, and bronze fittings catch the last low light before giving it back to dusk. Behind the waterfront, the city rises in ordered streets and crowded lanes, young by Egyptian measure, yet already layered with many voices. Alexandria was shaped after the age of Alexander and made the capital of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek ruling house in Egypt. That political history matters here, but in the evening it feels less like a proclamation than a texture. Greek words drift from one doorway, Egyptian from another, and traders from farther east add other accents that mix in the cooling air. Linen brushes past wool. A donkey's harness gives a small bell note and falls quiet again. Porters carry baskets of figs, jars of oil, folded cloth, and bundles of papyrus unloaded from ships not long before sunset. The harbour road is never fully still. Fishmongers rinse their boards. Sailors think about supper. Children are called in from lanes where the shade has deepened. Alexandria is famous for learning, but it is built hour by work that is plainer than fame. Grain must be measured, loaves baked, sandals mended, courtyards swept, lamps filled, water hauled, accounts checked. The city that houses a great library is also a city of bakers, potters, ferrymen, servants, reed cutters, and clerks. Farther along, beyond the busiest part of the quay, lie the grander districts shaped by royal ambition. Ancient writers praised Alexandria's broad streets and careful planning, though praise from ancient writers can make any city glow a little more brightly than daily life may have allowed. Still, this much is secure. The city was designed as a capital connected to sea routes, administration, and court life. The scholarly world you are walking toward did not float above ordinary existence. It depended on taxes, ships, storage rooms, royal favour, and the steady arrival of supplies. A cloth hanging over a doorway lifts once in the breeze and settles. Lamps appear one by one along houses and shops, not as a sudden blaze, but as patient points of gold. The great lighthouse on Pharos belongs to Alexandria's reputation, guiding ships from afar, though from here it sits beyond your immediate view. In later memory, the library too would come to seem like a beacon, but tonight it is simpler than that. It is part of a living city, joined to kitchens, markets, officials, servants, and roads. You turn inland. The smell of wet rope and fish, scales thins, replaced by dust, plaster, lamp oil, and fruit. A narrow side street reveals a modest house, likely of mud brick with a pale coating of lime wash, practical and close to the needs of the household inside. Most people in Alexandria do not spend their evenings comparing lines of poetry or discussing the stars. They labour, bargain, cook, mend, worship, and sleep. The city's celebrated institutions stand upon these quieter routines. And yet, you feel the pull of the place ahead. Somewhere beyond the market sounds lies the Mouseion, the shrine of the Muses, with which the famous library was associated. Not simply a storehouse, but a centre of study and residence. Not a dream detached from life, but a court-supported institution within a bustling port city. Behind you, the harbour keeps breathing in the dark. Ahead, the scholarly quarter waits. With unhurried steps, you leave the market sounds behind and walk toward the Mouseion. The streets broaden and the noise changes shape. Under colonnades, footsteps echo with a cooler, clearer sound than in the close lanes near the harbour. There are fewer shouted prices here, fewer hurried bargains, more attendants carrying writing boards, sealed jars and wrapped rolls of papyrus. This district bears the mark of planning and patronage. It feels tended. The Library of Alexandria was founded in the early 3rd century before the Common Era, most likely under Ptolemy I or his son Ptolemy II. The precise part played by individual advisors is harder to untangle because surviving evidence is fragmentary, and later authors sometimes polish the story. But the broad outline is well supported. The Ptolemaic rulers wanted Alexandria to be more than a political capital. They wanted it to be a cultural centre as well, a place where learning could gather under royal care. It helps to remember that the library belonged to a larger institution, the Mouseion. The name points to the Muses, yet this was not merely a shrine in the ordinary sense. It functioned more like an early research community. Scholars lived there, read there, wrote there, debated there, and shared meals there. Ancient descriptions mention walkways and communal arrangements, though not every architectural detail can be fixed with certainty. The important thing is that scholarship here had structure. It had funding. It had routine. Royal support shaped everything. Scholars associated with the Mouseion received stipends, and state-provided lodging, and some ancient accounts suggest relief from taxes as well. This support was not detached from politics. Patronage displayed the dynasty's refinement, gathered intellectual prestige around the court, and helped establish Alexandria as a place of distinction in the wider Mediterranean world. In a kingdom ruled by a foreign dynasty over an ancient land, learning could strengthen authority while also creating real spaces for study. You pass a wall warming softly in lamplight before it fades into shadow. Somewhere beyond it, water moves through a channel with a sound so gentle it almost resembles leaves. The scents here are cleaner than at the docks. Papyrus, ink, oil, wax, perhaps a trace of incense from a nearby shrine. A porter goes by with wooden boards tied neatly in cord. Another man carries a wrapped scroll against the evening damp. A servant in plain linen heads toward the kitchens with purposeful steps. Even in this elevated quarter, the life of learning rests on service and transport. The Mouseion drew people from many places. Greek was the main language of learned exchange in the world, fostered by the Ptolemies, but the institution did not stand apart from Egyptian and Near Eastern traditions. Texts came from several cultural worlds. Ideas crossed boundaries through copying, translation, commentary, and argument. The library's ambition to gather all known written works was real, even if imperfectly fulfilled and shaped by the preferences of those in power. As you move beneath a long stretch of colonnade, the city seems to exhale behind you. It has not gone silent, it has only softened. A lamp flame bends and steadies in a wall niche. Sand shifts lightly underfoot. You begin to sense the Mouseion not as a monument, but as a place of habits. Rooms to sleep in, halls to read in, tables to gather around, and evenings lit by oil and thought. Beyond the colonnade, you are welcomed into the quieter rhythm of scholars' rooms. The rooms do not announce luxury. Their comfort is measured and practical. Pale plastered walls catch the lamplight. A stool stands near a low writing surface. Storage chests sit against the wall. Rolled mats are kept neatly. A ceramic jar waits in the corner, its lid fitted with care. The arrangement suggests use more than display. Yet there is a kind of wealth here rarer than ornament, security, regular food, and time enough to think. Ancient sources describe scholars of the Mouseion as receiving lodging and stipends from the state, and communal meals were part of their routine. This made their lives unusual. Most people in Alexandria worked directly for their survival each day. They baked, hauled, sold, wove, carved, ferried, cooked, cleaned, rowed, recorded, and repaired. Their homes were often simpler, their comforts narrower, their futures more dependent on weather, prices, and health. Here the court had created a sheltered life for learning. You pass one chamber where a man sits close to a lamp, adjusting a roll of papyrus so the sheet lies smooth before him. In another, two scholars speak quietly, one older and one younger. The older man taps a finger against his knee as if marking the steps of an argument. No costly banquet couch gleams here. No palace display crowds the floor. But to have a room, a lamp, and the freedom to spend an evening on a difficult text is itself a privilege. Some rooms may belong to visitors newly arrived by ship, men from islands, inland cities, or other scholarly centres. Others likely belong to established residents known by their field as much as by birthplace. A grammarian, a physician, a geographer, an editor of old poems, a thinker who studies numbers or stars. A few names tied to Alexandria grew famous across centuries. Many more have disappeared, though they too copied, compared, and taught. The sounds are household sounds, softened by stone. A lid touches a jar with a light tap. A throat clears after long reading. Sandals are placed near a doorway. A servant folds linen in practiced movements. Ink cakes, reed pens, and scraps of writing material rest on a tray in practical disorder. The scholarly life can appear airy in memory, but here it is plainly made of objects and maintenance. It is not possible to know exactly how every room looked at any given date. Archaeological certainty is limited, and the ancient royal quarter has not yielded all the neat answers one might wish for. Literary descriptions can compress real spaces into ideal ones. Still, the broad picture is firm enough. The Mouseion was not a lonely retreat of isolated geniuses. It was communal, it was funded, it was lived in. Your thoughts drift outward to homes elsewhere in Alexandria. In a modest Egyptian household, a family may now be sharing bread, onions, perhaps lentils, or beer, according to means. In a merchant's house, accounts might still be tallied by lamplight. In a workshop, tools may be set aside after a day of labour. A child may already be asleep on a woven mat while an older relative finishes some last small task. Compared with those homes, the scholars here live apart from many pressures, even while depending on the labour of others. That dependence is easy to feel. Someone pressed the oil. Someone shaped the jars. Someone carried water, baked bread, caught fish, prepared papyrus, swept floors, and relayed messages between court and institution. The Mouseion can nurture thought only because the city keeps moving around it. You pause in a courtyard where cooler air gathers. Above, the sky has deepened, and a few early stars show themselves between rooflines. Men who measure the heavens live and work in these rooms. Yet before a star can be measured, a wick must be trimmed and a lamp made ready. Even prestige rests on domestic acts. Soon the fragrance of warm bread draws you towards the common table. It reaches you before the room comes fully into view, warm and yeasty, joined by the gentle salt of fish, the brightness of olives, and the earthy comfort of lentils and herbs. Lamps stand in safe places around the dining area, their low flames drawing gold along cups, bowls, and platters. The meal does not feel luxurious in a palace sense, but it feels steady, sufficient, and familiar. Ancient writers mention communal dining at the Mouseion, and it is easy to understand why it mattered. Shared meals create a different kind of scholarship from solitary reading. Questions arise naturally at the table. A disagreement can soften over bread. A passing remark about a line of poetry may grow into a commentary. Evening food gives conversation a place to land. The fare is likely simple. Bread sits at the centre, as it did for much of the ancient Mediterranean world. There is fish, perhaps fresh, perhaps preserved according to season and supply. Olives, cheese, figs, greens, and lentils may appear. Wine is present, mixed with water in the usual way. The exact menu would have varied, but the image of scholars eating modest foods like bread and fish is securely grounded. You settle among men from different places and backgrounds. One speaks in polished Greek, another carries the sound of the islands in his voice. Another moves with ease between Greek and Egyptian worlds. A physician remarks on food and balance. A grammarian cannot resist correcting a word in passing, though his smile keeps the correction gentle. Someone quotes a line of poetry. Laughter comes softly, not in uproar, but in a small, shared release. The table shows one of Alexandria's quiet strengths. People often speak of the library in terms of scroll numbers, but institutions are built from repeated human arrangements. Night after night, men supported by royal patronage ate together and exchanged thoughts. Their freedom from some ordinary burdens was uneven and privileged, but it allowed concentration. A scholar who did not need to spend the next morning securing grain could instead compare manuscripts. Bread is broken. Fish bones are set aside neatly. Oil gleams in a dish. Someone scatters herbs over lentils. The talk shifts from a recently arrived text to a dispute about place names, then to poetry, then in a very ordinary turn to the quality of papyrus from different suppliers. Even in a famous place, people complain mildly about materials. That plainness is comforting. The meal does not erase hierarchy. Some men enjoy greater favour, reputation, or authority than others. The court's eye matters. Seniority matters. Yet the act of passing bread creates a brief circle of common action. The Ptolemaic court may have intended prestige, but fellowship grows in its own quiet way. Outside, many Alexandrians are also eating, often with less certainty. Grain prices matter in any ancient city. Seasonal shortages matter. Bread for ordinary households is not atmosphere but necessity. Fish may be occasional. Meat is rarer for many than for the wealthy. Remembering this keeps the table honest. The meal here is moderate but protected. A servant refills a cup. Another gathers crusts that may later flavour broth or feed animals. Nothing is entirely without value. Every item has labour behind it. The oil in the lamp above the table carries fields, pressing, jars, and transport within it. As the meal loosens, people linger. One man recites remembered lines. Another traces a geometric figure with a fingertip in a bead of spilled wine, then wipes it away. A younger scholar listens carefully, learning not only facts but manners of speech, when to interrupt, when to defer, how to disagree without harshness. Shared dining teaches habits as surely as formal instruction does. At length, bowls are cleared, lamps adjusted and benches gently left behind. Supper does not end the day's work here. It simply changes its form. When the meal is finished, you follow the lamplight into the halls of scrolls. The air grows drier and stiller, touched by papyrus, glue, wood, and ink. Lamps are placed carefully, giving enough light without inviting needless risk. The materials themselves remind you how delicate this whole enterprise is. Papyrus preserves thought, but it remains plant fibre, pressed by hand. It can fray, warp, crack, or soften in damp air. Here the library's ambition becomes tangible. Knowledge does not float freely. It lives in rolls, tags, cases, hands, and lists. Ancient evidence agrees that the Ptolemies pursued a broad collecting mission. They sought to gather written works from across the world known to them. Greek texts in great quantity, but also Egyptian and Near Eastern writings through originals, copies, or translations. The dream was expansive. The reality required money, networks, and unglamorous labour. Later sources tell stories of books taken from ships entering Alexandria so they could be copied, with originals sometimes kept and copies returned. The details are difficult to verify in every case, but the story suits what we know of Ptolemaic determination. Purchase, borrowing, copying, diplomatic request, and sometimes pressure likely all played their part. A dynasty intent on prestige did not gather texts by waiting politely for chance. You move along storage areas where scrolls rest in orderly groups. The exact arrangement of the library remains uncertain, and modern reconstructions differ. What is certain is that any collection of this scale required cataloguing. One of the most famous scholarly tools associated with Alexandria was the Pinakes of Callimachus, a great bibliographic work that organized authors and texts by category and identifying details. The work itself does not survive complete, but ancient testimony makes its importance clear. In a place of many scrolls, order is as necessary as acquisition. Without catalogues, abundance becomes confusion. A title may appear in several versions. An author's name may be attached to doubtful works. A scribe's error can travel from copy to copy unless checked. Alexandrian scholars did not merely store texts. They compared them, edited them, arranged them, and tried to establish reliable versions. This was especially important for revered Greek literature, where even a small difference in wording might matter. Near one lamp, a copyist works with patient rhythm. His reed pen lifts and returns. A source roll is held in place so it does not curl shut. Fresh writing material waits close by. Another worker smooths a sheet or trims an edge. The later word scriptorium belongs to another age, but the activity is ancient enough. Copying as preservation. Some works are recopied because they are in demand, some because they are wearing out, some because one version needs to be checked against another. Small identifiers attached to rolls help distinguish them. Every library depends partly on architecture and partly on habit. A mislabeled scroll may be nearly lost while still sitting on a shelf. A careless hand may scatter order earned over years. As for the total size of the collection, later numbers grow very large, and modern retellings often repeat them. It is best to move carefully here. Ancient estimates may reflect grandeur more than exact counting, and scroll totals can mislead because a single long work may occupy several rolls while multiple copies of one text increase numbers without adding new content. The safest statement is also the most sensible. The collection was immense by ancient standards, but its exact size remains debated. The range of texts tells its own story. Greek dominated the formal scholarly world of the Mouseion, yet Alexandria's collecting mission reached toward other traditions as well. Egyptian knowledge and Near Eastern writings formed part of the wider landscape. The later tradition of a Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures connected with Alexandria belongs to this larger atmosphere of textual encounter, even though the details are wrapped in both history and legend. What can be said plainly is that Alexandria became one of the great places where texts met across languages. Dust turns slowly through the lamplight. Somewhere down the hall, a scholar murmurs while comparing two versions line by line. Another unrolls a text only as far as necessary, careful not to strain the seam. Tiny acts of caution accumulate into preservation. Thought here depends on fingers, cord, shelves, and memory. You think of the papyrus plant cut in marshy places, pressed into sheets, carried by merchants, recorded by clerks, purchased by institutions, and worn smooth by repeated reading. Every scroll bears the marks of trade as well as intellect. The library feels vast, yet it is joined to reeds, river roots, porters, knives, and twine. Its ambition is almost tender in its boldness. To gather all known written works is impossible, even while being pursued with confidence. New texts appear. Old ones decay. Languages divide and multiply. Yet the effort creates a new kind of place, where distant thoughts can lie near one another. A poem from one shore and a treatise from another may share the same hall. Distance shortens by shelf and catalogue. Before long, you find a circle of listeners gathered beneath the steady glow of lamps. The room is modest rather than grand. A bench lines one wall. A clear space has been made near a table. A few men sit on stools or cushions while a speaker traces an argument with economical movements of the hand. The light is enough for faces, notes, and attentive eyes. Darkness rests quietly in the corners beyond. This is the living centre of the institution. Ancient Alexandria was not only a repository of texts, but an active intellectual community where philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, geography, medicine, and literary criticism were pursued in company. The Mouseion gave these studies a home. Ideas were spoken aloud, questioned, refined, and sometimes gently resisted. Tonight, the discussion begins with geometry. A figure has been drawn. A proposition is stated, then developed step by step from what has already been accepted. The orderly progress naturally recalls Euclid, long associated with Alexandria. Whether he himself ever stood in a room exactly like this, on an evening exactly like this, cannot be proved. But the geometrical culture linked to his name certainly belongs in this setting. Knowledge here advances by patient sequence. A listener raises an objection. Another suggests that a term has been used too loosely. The speaker pauses, acknowledges the problem, and restates the point more carefully. There is pleasure in that clarification, not the hard pleasure of defeating an opponent, but the gentler satisfaction of confusion becoming cleaner. Soon the subject broadens toward geography and the shape of the inhabited world. Distances between places are discussed. Reports from travellers are weighed against older authorities. At once the thought of Eratosthenes comes near, another scholar associated with Alexandria, remembered for geography, chronology, and his careful estimate of the Earth's circumference. Again, no single scene can be claimed with certainty. Yet the intellectual environment that made such work possible is right here. Texts, measurements, travel accounts, and mathematical habits meeting in one institution. One man mentions star risings observed farther east. Another refers to Egyptian calendrical practice. A philosopher wonders what use such measurements have unless they help order life well. Mild amusement passes through the room. Different fields have always rubbed gently against one another. The circle is not made up only of Greeks speaking among themselves, though Hellenistic forms clearly shape the conversation. Alexandria's learned culture existed in Egypt and drew upon wider worlds. Egyptian knowledge of river, land, calendar, and temple tradition formed part of the environment, even when formal prestige leaned toward Greek expression. Near Eastern learning too arrived through texts, scholars, and commerce. Power affected whose voice carried farthest, but the city's mixed character lives in the references, accents, and materials of the place. One lecture gives way to another almost without pause. Now, a literary scholar considers differing lines in a poem, asking which reading is older and which seems smoothed by later taste. To an outsider, the matter might sound narrow, yet in a manuscript culture, every line matters. A copied mistake can shape understanding for generations. Careful comparison becomes a quiet act of rescue. The lamps scent the room faintly with oil. You hear papyrus unrolling, a stylus scratching, a measured cough, the shift of cloth on a bench. Outside, Alexandria continues its night routines. Boats dock late, ovens cool. Guards change places, families settle. Here time feels gathered and held. A younger listener asks a broad and earnest question. The older men do not brush it aside. One narrows it. Another points toward a useful text. Apprenticeship lives in such moments. Knowledge survives not only through great discoveries, but through patient answers to imperfect questions. There are surely rivalries here. Ancient scholarly life was not free from pride. Credit mattered. Reputation mattered. Sharp judgments sometimes survived in writing. Yet tonight, what reaches you most strongly is shared devotion. The wish to know more exactly, to phrase more truly, to preserve what can be preserved. As the circle loosens, private conversations continue in undertones. Two men remain with astronomy. Another returns a borrowed text. One scholar stares at a geometric figure after the discussion has ended, as though thought still hangs there. The room grows quieter without becoming empty. In this gentle hour, the library feels less like a monument and more like a home for attentive minds. As the night deepens, your thoughts drift beyond this single evening into centuries yet to come. The scrolls still rest in order tonight. The lamps still burn. The scholars still question and answer. Yet no human institution remains full forever. The Library of Alexandria did not vanish in one neat moment, and the famous story of a single destruction is much too simple for the evidence we have. Over time, the library and its associated institutions suffered multiple episodes of damage, decline, and transformation. War, political change, altered patronage, neglect, and the ordinary vulnerability of stored texts all mattered. Some events may have damaged part of a collection rather than all of it. Some may have affected nearby or related buildings. The end, if there was a single end at all, was gradual. One well-known tradition connects serious damage with the time of Julius Caesar, when fire spread in Alexandria's harbour zone. Ancient sources disagree in detail, and scholars continue to debate what exactly burned and how extensive the loss was. It is possible that storehouses containing books were harmed. It is not certain that the entire library disappeared then. Later centuries brought other disruptions. A library depends on continued support, and when political worlds change, Decline can arrive quietly. That slower truth feels especially human. Knowledge is not always lost in one dramatic night. More often it frays. A roof is left unrepaired. A catalogue grows out of date. A copy is not made before a scroll weakens. A room is repurposed. A language becomes less widely read. A scholar dies before training a successor. Damp enters. Resources thin. The silence gathers little by little. Standing in this evening hall, you feel how fragile abundance really is. Every role survives only through repeated acts. Writing, copying, storing, repairing, reading, teaching, and copying again. Break enough links in that chain, and a work slips away. The later symbolic power of Alexandria rests partly on this simple truth. It became an emblem of lost knowledge not because it alone contained wisdom, but because it shows how vulnerable memory can be when housed in perishable things. Some later accounts probably enlarged the library in memory. Ancient people, like modern ones, could idealize what was gone. Collection sizes may have been exaggerated. Claims of universality may have stretched beyond practical reality. Yet even after allowing for that, the institution remains extraordinary. It gathered scholars from different backgrounds, organized a vast body of texts, and sustained study on a rare scale. Its decline also reminds you that no single building ever held all knowledge. Other libraries, schools, temples, and households preserved learning elsewhere. Traditions continued in quotations, copies, translations, summaries, and teaching far from Alexandria. To mourn this place honestly is not to imagine the whole ancient world going dark at once. It is to recognize a great center dimming and to feel the cost of what was not recopied, not protected, not remembered. The men who shared bread earlier could not see the whole shape of that future. They knew schedules, drafts, shortages, appointments, repairs, illnesses, arguments, and seasons. They lived in the present tense of an institution, not in legend. That is why this evening matters. Before loss became story, there was daily life. A lamp bends and rights itself. Dust turns in the beam. The scroll touched tonight, by a careful hand, may endure for centuries, or vanish within a few generations. The uncertainty humbles without disturbing. Knowledge can feel powerful while spoken aloud and delicate the moment you notice the material that carries it. And still, the library endured long enough to shape memory far beyond its walls. The idea of gathering many cultures' writings in one place, arranging them, comparing them, and studying them together has outlived every uncertainty about the building itself. So has the lesson hidden inside that ambition. Human beings can collect astonishing things. Human beings can also fail to keep them. Between those truths lies the quiet labor of preservation. The sadness of that thought remains gentle. This evening is not erased by what comes later. The bread was still shared, the lessons were still given, the catalogue was still compiled. The young scholar's question was still answered. Even a lost library was once a living one. At last you step back through the colonnade and make your way once more toward the sea. The Mouseion recedes behind you as lamplight softens between the pillars. Outside, the air feels cooler now. The stone has given up its stored warmth. The city has settled into its night arrangements. Doors drawn in, courtyards quiet, a few late footsteps, the small clink of pottery being stacked after washing, a murmur from a distant guard post. As you walk, the evening gathers itself into one calm thread. The library was never separate from Alexandria. Its scholars depended on bakers, fishermen, servants, sailors, papyrus workers, copyists, and rulers. Its halls of scrolls depended on the harbour road and the ships beyond it. Its careful arguments depended on simple suppers. Its fame depends in part on its fragility. City and library belonged to one another. You pass again by ordinary houses where sleep now lies close. Behind one wall someone coughs and settles. Behind another, a child turns on a mat. In a wealthier home, perhaps a clerk still bends over accounts by a steadier lamp. In the royal quarter, guards remain awake. Alexandria holds all these lives together, from palace administration to narrow domestic routine. The smell of the harbour reaches you before the water does. Salt, tar, wet wood, fish, and open night air. Then the road widens, and the dark surface of the sea returns, taking broken threads of lamplight. Masts stand nearly motionless. A rope creaks once against a moored vessel. A small wave folds itself against stone. Then another answers. You think of the scholars returning after supper to their scrolls. You think of Euclid and Eratosthenes not as distant statues of intellect, but as names tied to rooms, meals, materials, and patient exchange. You think, too, of all the unnamed people, the copyist with the steady hand, the servant refilling oil, the porter carrying rolls from ship to shelf, the cook baking bread, the scholar whose sound work never carried his name far into the future. History often shines around a few remembered figures, but its warmth comes from many quiet lives. Later stories about destruction have their own force, but here by the evening shore another truth feels steadier. Knowledge is communal. It is made in conversation, fed by routine, stored in fragile matter, and entrusted to institutions that must be maintained by ordinary effort. The Library of Alexandria endures in memory because it joined those things on a remarkable scale. It also endures because people continue to feel the poignancy of something precious gathered and only partly kept. The breeze that met you earlier returns, cooler now, lifting the edge of your clothing and carrying the sea's damp freshness inland. Behind you, the scholarly quarter rests in darkness, touched by a few remaining lamps. Ahead, the harbour lies patient and dim, with ships at anchor and the city breathing around them. The first place and the last place are one. So you remain for a quiet moment on the harbour road, where Alexandria holds motion and stillness together. The market noise has faded. The scholars' voices have softened into memory. The sea keeps its measured rhythm against stone. And in that calm, the great library becomes neither legend nor ruin, but simply part of an evening once truly lived. Bread shared, scrolls unrolled, questions asked, lamps tended, and knowledge held for a time within human hands, before the night moved gently on.